My artwork is popular because it connects with the ordinary person, and they can understand it very easily. And I've always meant it to be so. I've never confined my art to a particular section of humanity. I love people in general. My art reflects it, and that's the way it's always been.
Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Folks, we're going to talk about the disrespect Jack Kirby dealt with today. Now, Jack Kirby was a creative force unlike any in American comics. The creator of characters like Thor, Hulk, Darkseid, Captain America, dozens more. His creations, his style, and his storytelling decisions continue to be relevant to comics creators and readers today. And if you know anything about his history, he wasn't really rewarded properly for that while he was alive. In fact, he ping-ponged between the two biggest companies, Marvel and DC, throughout his career, like about 3 runs at each place. But what specifically made him quit each time? It was the lack of respect his editors and publishers showed him. Sometimes that was by not giving him the proper credit, which I've discussed in the past, but today, we're going to look at instances where editors thought they knew better than Jack Kirby and would have his work redrawn without even asking him. Strap in because this is an awkward and bumpy journey. Please hit like and subscribe. That helps. Maybe even use some hype points on this video. Hype points definitely help. And without any further ado, let me tell you about Jack Kirby's continuous disrespect. Let's start with a very high-level greatest hits compilation of Jack's art career before the massive success of Marvel's superheroes that he created in the 60s. Jack breaks into comics at just age 19, working on newspaper strips. He gets work animating Popeye at Fleischer Studios. Kirby then gets regular work for dozens of comic studios in the golden age of comics and co-creates Captain America in 1940. He serves in the army over in Europe during World War II, returns home, and creates a hit new genre in 1950s comics, romance comics. Even though he'd created characters like Challengers of the Unknown for DC in 1957, the editors there would also criticize him for little things. According to the book Tales to Astonish, Jack Kirby's Stan Lee and the American Comic Book Revolution, that included stuff like forgetting to draw shoelaces on a cavalryman's boots. Who cares? So Kirby went back to Timely in 1958, which was now known as Atlas. Eventually it would become Marvel. He was drawing sci-fi and monster stories. But Atlas was not doing very well. And in a last-ditch attempt to stay alive, Kirby and Stan Lee created Fantastic Four in 1961, which was a massive hit.
But my gun isn't real. I made it out of wood, specially to fool you.
What? A wooden gun?
That's why your power didn't work. And it's why you're a prisoner of the police now.
That was followed by new creations by Kirby like Ant-Man, Hulk, Thor, the X-Men, many more. Marvel editor-in-chief Stan Lee clearly saw the fan love for Jack Kirby and would occasionally include his name on the cover as a selling point, including Tales to Astonish number 50 from 1959, the cover and letters page of Fantastic Four number 10 from 1963, and X-Men number 3's cover that very same year. And that was a time when credit was not always consistently given. And yet, while Marvel was happy to market Jack Kirby's art, and there are many stories of Stan Lee asking other artists to draw like Jack, Lee would just as often change elements of Kirby's artwork. My episode about the Marvel method has a bunch of quotes from various artists about that. What makes this a hard subject to make a full video on is that a lot of the redrawn artwork would be considered lost media. No one necessarily knew the enduring popularity these comics would have, and on top of that, Marvel frequently gave away Jack Kirby's original artwork to business partners. The art that has survived often has the final inks, and there aren't always photocopies of Kirby's original pencils. But some have survived, and that's what I'm going to share with you and discuss. For instance, here are the photocopies of Jack Kirby's pencils from issue 44 of Fantastic Four, as inked by Joe Sinhot. These pages have gone up for auction, so we can compare them to the published artwork. And we see that panels 3 and 4 were changed before publication. Invisible Woman is supposed to be in those pages according to the original art, but are completely omitted from the published page. In fact, the panel with Gorgon probably went through some significant redrawing to get to this specific final version. Who drew that? Well, this issue came out in late 1965, and the only people technically on staff at Marvel were Stan Lee, assistant Flo Steinberg, and production manager Saul Brodsky. So maybe Brodsky did it? Otherwise, any of the freelancers at the time that were dropping off art or getting an assignment would be asked by Lee to make changes, unpaid. So maybe someone like Don Heck, or, in my opinion, Marie Severin. John Romita had really only just started there recently. Wallace Wood, he hated redrawing other artists on principle, as did Steve Ditko. Sometimes it was done, but they didn't like to do that. Some artists like Gene Colan that were working there had too unique of a style, so he wouldn't really be asked to redraw people's faces. My guess would be Marie Severin, but we'll never know for sure. Another example of redrawn faces come from issues 101 through 103 of Captain America. This is especially brazen since this is a character that Jack Kirby co-created with Joe Simon. If anyone should know how to draw Cap, it would be Kirby. But here are some side-by-side examples of Cap's face being redrawn, as well as his love interest, Sharon Carter. Sharon was also co-created by Kirby. At least this time we can tell who did it. It's clearly the work of John Romita, who Stan Lee felt drew prettier women and sometimes just liked how he could soften a character's features. In 2010, Kirby's heirs sued Marvel unsuccessfully for the rights to Jack's creations. That led to a deposition where John Romita described redrawing things, saying, quote, "I had to change Jack Kirby's work, Gene Colan's work, John Buscema's work. I idolized all of these guys. It violated me to have to do it. I cringed. And I will tell you, the worst thing is initially, we didn't have the equipment or the technology to do it less obtrusively, because originally we didn't have photostats and Xeroxes to work with. I erased things. To this minute, the hair on the back of my neck stands up when I am thinking I am erasing a Jack Kirby face and putting my face in there. That to me is a criminal act. I did it because I had no choice. Stan asked me to change it." End quote. Issue 103 is a rare example where we have the original art for the cover by Jack Kirby, and then the final published version. The credits for inks are to Sid Shores, and clearly the Red Skull's face has been changed. Why would editor Stan Lee have requested this? I feel like the original art is objectively more exciting and menacing. Again, we can only speculate as to why he felt that needed to be changed. Thor was a character who Jack Kirby was very proud of because he introduced all of the Asgardian mythology ideas. In fact, he continued to explore similar godly themes in New Gods at DC once he left Marvel, and then he continued to explore those same things through Eternals when he returned to Marvel. Kirby put a lot of himself into Thor, but that title got art edits too. In 1968's Thor 154, we can see that the pencil art by Kirby and the inked pages by Vince Colletta frequently look quite different, especially these three background men. Now, I have discussed how Vince Colletta frequently omitted details to hit deadlines, but in this case, the design is just different. And if we jump to panel 1 of this page, a whole character has been eliminated, along with his dialogue. To me, that speaks to an editorial decision between Kirby dropping off his pages and the pages going to an inker. Was Kirby consulted about this? Almost definitely not. One reason was there just wasn't time. Everything had to be mailed or hand-delivered back then, which cut into production time. In 2010, a fan asked Mark Evanier about editors asking for these changes. Evanier had been Kirby's production assistant, so he was uniquely qualified to talk about it, and he explained. At Marvel in the 60s, Stan Lee sometimes didn't have anyone on staff who could do that, and he'd grab Kirby or Ditko when they visited the office and have them do a redraw on someone else's work, without pay, by the way. There were a number of cases where he had pencilers redraw whole pages because he didn't like the way they'd plotted a sequence. There was no pay for this, and it became a sore spot for some artists. Joe Orlando, for example, stopped working for Marvel because Stan, he said, kept making him redraw whole pages to change the story. At one point, he refused to make major changes in a Giant Man story, and so he never worked for Marvel again. And Stan had Steve Ditko do the necessary redraws. Kirby had a number of fights over this kind of thing. Stan would sometimes insist on story changes, and Jack would have to redraw pages, and he usually did not agree with the alterations. Since he was not paid for the rejected pages, they should have been returned to him, but they rarely were. One of the last straws for Jack Kirby was what they did to his art for the Marvel Mania posters of 1970. In late 1969, mail-order businessman Don Wallace convinced Marvel to create a fan club. In 1970, Marvel and Don decided to make 11 posters of Marvel characters for the fan club. Many of these were done by Jack Kirby. But then they had John Romita redraw the Spider-Man one, possibly to keep it closer to what they considered the correct model. They also had Herb Trimpe redo the face on the Hulk. And sure, Trimpe was known for drawing the Hulk at that time. But Kirby also created that character, so it wasn't like he got it wrong. And people loved Jack Kirby. That's why Marvel hired him to do the posters. But what probably offended Kirby the most was what they did with a Thriller issue that he was commissioned to illustrate. Chamber of Darkness #4 is a story of a character very much like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And John B. Cook uncovered the original pages by Kirby to compare to the published version. It's completely different. Panels chopped up and rearranged, faces redrawn and re-inked by maybe Marie Severin, maybe John Verpoeten, at least most likely, and not for the better. Apparently, on top of that, the final lettering pass changed a bunch of Kirby's suggestions. Combine that with Marvel offering Kirby a really low new contract, and he had had enough. After talking to DC for the last couple of years, he signed a new contract with them, and he began writing and drawing comics for DC in 1971. Kirby explained his thinking at the time in a May of 1971 interview on the Northwestern University student radio station. He was asked why he had gone to DC Comics, and he told host Tim Skelly, quote, "I have a lot more leeway. I can think things out and do them my way, and know I get credit for the things I do. There were times at Marvel when I couldn't say anything because it would be taken from me and put in another context, and it would be lost. All of my connection with it would be severed. For instance, I created the Silver Surfer and Galactus, and an army of other characters, and my connection with them is lost. Therefore, I just keep all the new ideas to myself," end quote. Things started well at DC. The publisher went all out on advertising to their readers that Jack Kirby was coming to work for them with all sorts of house ads. He was a big name and a selling point. Kirby would initially work on 4 titles. 3 of them were new and part of his New Gods series. Kirby grew up in the Depression and never wanted to take work away from another person, so he didn't want to be assigned to a title that already had a regular creative team. Jimmy Olsen was a book that did not, so Kirby also took that one, rolling in a bunch of his New Gods ideas and having an opportunity to draw Superman. But right from the very first cover, DC stepped in and changed Kirby's art. In fact, throughout his Jimmy Olsen run, DC consistently had Superman artists Al Plastino and Murphy Anderson redraw Superman and Jimmy's faces. Again, Evanier has written about how Kirby felt about this, writing on his blog, quote, Jack was royally pissed about the fact that someone at DC insisted that his drawings of Superman and Jimmy Olsen had to be retouched. I mean, what artist wouldn't be unhappy about something like that? He also didn't understand the thinking. For weeks and weeks, folks at DC were telling him, we want you to take our comics in new directions. We need you to help us reinvent our line for the future. And then, the first time he hands something in, the reaction is, whoa, this doesn't look like what we've been publishing. We need to bring in a guy who's been drawing Superman since the late 40s, an artist we no longer even want to have working on Superman. Al Plastino was not working regularly on the Superman titles at the time, to redraw everything, end quote. So Jack was annoyed, and Jack was mystified. But he was also new at DC and eager to show his new employer that he could fit in and play well with others. He may have told them it didn't bother him a lot, but he sure told me and everyone around him how wrong he thought it was, both in terms of respect for his work and for the sales of the comic, end quote. But this time, in addition to showing you some of these changes, I have a quote from Kirby himself. Gary Groth interviewed Jack and his wife Roz Kirby in the summer of 1989. That was published in issue 135 of the Comics Journal from February of 1990. Kirby: they cut the heads off my Superman, and then they replaced them with a standard Superman head. Groth: did that bother you? Kirby: yes, it bothered me, of course, because a man is entitled to draw things in his own style. I didn't hurt Superman. I made him powerful. I admire Superman, but I've got to do my own style. That's how I would see it, and I had a right to do that, and nobody had the right to tamper with your work and shape it differently. What if he gave it to an amateur? Think of what an amateur might do to your work. Kirby managed to stay at DC almost 5 years, also creating characters like Etrigan the Demon, Omac. He worked on Cobra, Kamandi, the boy from the future. That's a good book that he created. He created all that stuff on top of the New Gods. Now, Darkseid likely remains his largest contribution to the publisher. It's a huge gift that he gave them. But he got tired of his work being redrawn without even talking to him. Allegedly, he also felt like the other artists and editors there at DC didn't treat him kindly because he was so well associated with the Marvel style, and DC wanted to show that they didn't need to be indebted to Kirby to be successful. Gary Groth asked Kirby why he left DC in 1976. Roz Kirby blurted out editor Carmine Infantino's name, and Jack Kirby explained, quote, there are people in editorial positions that shouldn't be there. This seemed to be a period where Marvel and DC were relying on the wrong people in the right positions. These were the people who were wrong for these positions, end quote. So, in 1976, Kirby went back to Marvel and instantly got treated the same way. In fact, as his DC contract came to its end, Kirby did a few covers for Marvel, and they were already meddling with his work, as you can see in this September 1975 cover for Giant Size Conan number 5, where John Romita has redrawn Conan's face. Romita actually redrew quite a bit of Kirby's work in the 1970s. Marvel hired Kirby to draw the artwork for their 1977 calendar. Then, Romita redrew it quite a bit, especially Spider-Man. That's somewhat understandable, I suppose, to stay on model, but I don't know why you'd hire Kirby in the first place if you're not going to use what he gives you. Because Romita also redrew Kirby's covers just to subtly change the angle of a face. For instance, also from 1977, issue 158 of Avengers. It just feels like a waste of both artists' time. This continued, as you can see here, with changes to the faces on Khazar number 12, which also changes his saber-toothed tiger Zabu inexplicably. And also Thor issue 255. And come on now, that is a character that Kirby created. It does not need to be retouched. By 1979, Jack Kirby was done with monthly comics for Marvel and DC. He did a few independent comics. He did a few small projects like DC Superpowers. Mostly, he moved over to animation, which paid better and gave him health insurance and other benefits. In 1982, he explained how he felt about comics to Comic Scene magazine in issue 2, saying, quote, "Only a fool can function under the old comic structure. Why should a man draw a good picture if they are going to give it to 3 other guys? Why should a man write a good story if the company keeps it? Why should a man even ink when he's not sure whether the company will take care of him or not?" End quote. And I don't think any of us can blame him. Jack Kirby was a storyteller, an innovator, and yet the industry just did not respect him properly when he was working. Only in hindsight is the love and respect universal, but it rings a bit hollow, in my opinion, when Disney says that Jack Kirby is part of their Disney legends. What does that mean now? What does that mean? Still, we the reader do benefit from some of this retroactive love that the publishers bestow on Kirby. For instance, DC has now reprinted Jack's work on books like Jimmy Olsen without the redrawn Superman faces. And hopefully, editors can learn from past mistakes and try to treat comics artists and writers with the respect that they are due, knowing that history may not view them kindly in retrospect if they get it wrong. Folks, appreciate you watching. I love talking about Jack Kirby. Got a few more thoughts I'll give you over the closing credits, as well as something new I'm doing over on my Patreon. But that's all I've got to say about Jack Kirby in regards to the disrespect he was shown. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like and subscribe on the way out. And remember, keep reading comics. Whew. This was not a hard episode for me to write or record, but it was a very hard episode to gather the materials, the images of, what's almost all lost media. There's just not a lot of original Jack Kirby art out there that we can compare it to. It's all been given away and, sold. And, some rich private collectors have some of it, but a lot of it is missing, and it's a bummer. So I will say thank you to people out there like the Kirby Collector, other books by Tomorrows. They are always looking for this kind of stuff. A good source was looking on auction sites for the art that has been sold so that I could compare it to published stuff. And then there's all sorts of amazing fan groups on places like Facebook, Jack Kirby and the Marvel Method, where readers and fans have here and there come across something and shared it, and thank God they have. And all I'm trying to do is share a few of those pieces to a wider audience. But yeah, I would be curious, what do you think was the most disrespectful thing done to Jack Kirby's art? What do you think was the single most disrespectful thing? Also, on Patreon, I always do one extra episode every month for my patrons at the $2 and up tiers. And I've decided to do something new for 2026. I'm going to do episodes, if I'm not putting them on YouTube, all of a sudden it occurred to me, I'm not bound by YouTube's restrictions. Too hot for YouTube? Yeah, I'm going to talk about all sorts of indie outlaw comics that are too gory, or there's too much sex. Yeah, too much sex, too much violence? Who cares? I'm going to just do little essays on some of those issues because I don't care anymore about, obviously, the YouTube algorithm or ad money on stuff like that, so I might as well do something different for my patrons. Just a little bonus. And yeah, so I'm kind of excited to talk about some of that stuff that doesn't seem as mainstream or clean. And I will be talking here and there about, indie comics. I mean, I'm always going to make episodes about, The Crow or Robert Crumb or something like that. But there's some that are just so extreme that I just know I wouldn't get any advertising dollars. I'm going to put those on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, folks. See you real soon. Bye. In fact, the payable... One reason was they're just what... Kitty! Quiet! Everything had to be mailed or Come on! There were a number of cases where he had pencilers read. This is a story about a character, kind of like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Oh, it's Notre Dame here. Interview on the Northwestern University student radio station. I could do that better. Kirby grew up in the Depression and never wanted to take artwork. Oh, almost. Whoa, this doesn't look like what we've been published. That kind of stuff. No, I don't like how I'm saying that.